When Emma and I bought the cozy, two-story house at the end of Willow Creek Drive, we thought we had discovered a slice of heaven. The trees arched over the sidewalks like something out of a storybook. Kids played hopscotch in the cul-de-sac. Lawns looked surgically maintained. Even the air seemed fresher. Our first morning there, still dizzy from hauling furniture, I was dragging a toolbox out of the truck when she arrived. Karen Whitmore. 40-something, bobbed blonde hair stiff with hairspray, lips pursed like she'd sucked a lemon. She wore a crisp polo embroidered with the words, Willow Creek Estates HOA President. Welcome to the neighborhood. Karen chirped, extending a clipboard like a weapon. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took the paper. It was a checklist, regulations, restrictions, expectations. Everything from lawn height requirements to an approved color palette for holiday decorations. Sign at the bottom, Karen instructed, tapping her manicured nail against the page. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't we already agree to this when we bought the house? Just a formality, she said, voice saccharine. The HOA likes a personal touch. Emma, peeking out from the doorway, shot me a look that said, be polite. So, I signed. Karen beamed, clipped the form back onto her clipboard, and leaned in slightly. We pride ourselves on maintaining high standards here. I hope you'll be cooperative. And with that, she pivoted sharply on her spotless sneakers and marched off. I should have seen it then, the warning hidden behind the welcome. For a few weeks, things were quiet. We painted the living room, planted roses along the fence, and I set up my woodworking bench in the garage. Wanting to power my tools outdoors without dragging cords through the house, I installed a heavy-duty outlet by the driveway. Properly grounded, code-compliant, neat as a pin. Saturday morning, as I tightened the last screw on the outlet cover, I caught a flash of bright orange across the street. An extension cord. Thick, industrial grade. I followed it with my eyes, across the asphalt, over the curb, up to Karen's porch. There, humming along in the shade, were a bubble machine, a leaf blower, and a string of carnival lights, all plugged into a tangled mass of splitters, and all drawing power from my outlet. I stood there for a long moment, stunned. Surely, it was a mistake. A misunderstanding. I knocked on Karen's door. After a few minutes, she opened it, phone pressed to her ear. She waved me off impatiently. I'll be off in a sec, she mouthed. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, she tucked the phone away and gave me a blinding smile. Problem? She asked sweetly. You're using my outlet, I said carefully. Oh, that. She waved dismissively. It's for the community event tomorrow. The HOA allows resource sharing for sanctioned activities. Page 12, subsection B. I frowned, but I never agreed to share my utilities. Karen's smile sharpened. Participation is strongly encouraged. We all do our part. Besides, she winked, it's just a little juice. Before I could respond, she shut the door in my face. I unplugged the cord anyway, neatly coiling it at the edge of her lawn. Problem solved, I thought. The next morning, the cord was back, plugged into my outlet again, as if nothing had happened. This time, I unplugged it and left a polite note taped to the coil. Please do not use my power outlet without permission. Thank you. 2 days later, a letter from the HOA arrived in our mailbox. Violation: non-cooperation with community event policies. Fine $150. Correction required immediately to avoid escalation. I stared at the letter, jaw tightening. Emma read it over my shoulder. This can't be real, she said. They can't fine you for not letting her steal electricity. But it was real. Karen wasn't just playing neighborly games. She was playing dirty. By the end of the week, 2 more violations arrived. One cited inappropriate signage for the note I had left. The other accused me of creating a hostile atmosphere toward HOA leadership. Each fine was more absurd than the last. Each one signed, smugly, by Karen Whitmore. I realized then, in Willow Creek Estates, fairness wasn't the rule, power was. And Karen held it like a queen holding court. But I wasn't about to let her rule over me. Not without a fight. For a few days, I considered letting it go. Maybe pay the fines, ignore the cords, and retreat into the comfort of our little backyard oasis. After all, we'd moved here for peace, not war. But Karen wasn't after peace. She was after obedience. By the following weekend, the power theft had grown bolder. Now she had a full-on bounce house inflating across her front yard, gulping down electricity like a ravenous beast. Strings of lights snaked from her porch to the mailbox. And my outdoor outlet was at the center of it all, fueling her private carnival. Enough was enough. I spent Sunday morning at the hardware store, assembling a plan. Heavy-duty materials. Industrial-grade tools. A few raised eyebrows from the clerk, but no questions asked. I returned home with a trunk full of supplies and a mind buzzing with ideas. First, I shut off the breaker to the outdoor outlet and rewired it internally, not to cut it off, but to reroute it to a simple treadmill I'd salvaged years ago from a garage sale. A beast of a machine, rusted in spots, but still functional. I positioned the treadmill just inside the garage door, set it to its steepest incline, and rigged the outlet so that any electrical draw would trigger the treadmill to start running. The more power someone tried to pull, the faster the belt spun. I even left a neat little sign taped to the outlet cover. Warning: high-resistance training zone. Unauthorized use may result in extreme cardio. That evening, I waited by the living room window, pretending to read a book while keeping one eye on the driveway. Sure enough, just before sunset, I spotted Karen's husband, Doug, a paunchy, sheepish-looking man who never seemed entirely comfortable in his own skin. He glanced around furtively, then tiptoed across the street with a cursed orange cord in hand. He jammed the plug into my outlet. Inside the garage, the treadmill roared to life. Startled, Doug stumbled backward, dropping the cord like it had bitten him. From across the street, Karen barked something unintelligible. Doug picked up the cord and tried again. The treadmill spun faster. Confused, Doug traced the cord to the garage, peeking through the half-open door. His face paled as he realized the setup. I almost laughed out loud. Doug retreated, dragging the cord like a shameful leash behind him. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, tapping her foot furiously. Minutes later, a new email hit my inbox. Subject: urgent. Violation of community infrastructure norms. Message: unauthorized tampering with communal utilities will not be tolerated. Immediate compliance required. Willow Creek HOA President, Karen Whitmore. Communal utilities. They really thought my private outlet was a public park. This wasn't about the electricity anymore. It wasn't even about HOA rules. It was about control. Emma watched me read the email, eyebrows arched. You gonna cave? I shook my head slowly. Not a chance. The next morning, the escalation began. A printed notice fluttered on our front door. Mandatory HOA inspection, Tuesday, 9 a.m. A second notice arrived an hour later. Request for outlet removal. Immediate action required. Karen wasn't trying to negotiate. She was trying to bulldoze. At 9 o'clock sharp on Tuesday, Karen and two HOA board members, both sour-faced retirees who looked like they hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration, arrived with clipboards and scowls. I met them at the door, arms folded. We're here to inspect unauthorized modifications to communal infrastructure, Karen announced, voice cold enough to frost glass. My outlet, I corrected. On my property. Wired to my equipment. Karen narrowed her eyes. We'll see what the city has to say about that. As they poked and prodded around the side of the house, I watched them, noting how Karen barked orders like a drill sergeant while the other two scribbled obediently. She thrived on intimidation, on fear. But I wasn't afraid anymore. If she wanted a fight, I was ready to give her one. Not with shouting. Not with threats. With strategy. By the time the inspection ended and they stomped off in a huff, I already knew my next move. Karen wanted my outlet gone because it was a symbol, proof she couldn't dictate every inch of this neighborhood. And I was about to make that symbol impossible for her to ignore. I just needed the right moment. And believe me, it was coming. The morning after the so-called inspection, I drove straight to City Hall. 2 hours, 3 counters, and a patient clerk named Mr. Alvarez later. I walked out armed with exactly what I needed: copies of the local electrical code, property rights documentation, and a fresh permit certifying my outdoor outlet as fully legal, up to code, and entirely private. I made 2 extra copies. One for my files. One for the inevitable showdown. By the time I pulled back into Willow Creek Estates, Karen's bounce house was gone, replaced by a smug new addition to her front yard. A large, hand-painted sign that read, "Community event this Saturday, fun for all." And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Generously powered by Willow Creek neighbors." Neighbors. Plural. As if my outlet had been democratically volunteered. Emma read the sign and groaned. "She's doubling down." I smiled grimly. Let her. I spent the next few days preparing. First, I built a simple wooden box around the treadmill, disguising it as an unassuming garden shed. I ran a few fake wires from the box toward my fence, making it look suspiciously like I had rigged up a complicated and very delicate electrical system. Then I waited. On Friday evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Karen made her move. I heard the telltale scuff of shoes across my driveway. Peeking through the blinds, I watched as she marched up to my outlet, extension cord in hand, accompanied by a small entourage, Doug and 2 HOA board members. They didn't bother being sneaky anymore. Karen plugged the cord in with a triumphant snap, tossed her hair over her shoulder, and pointed dramatically at the wooden box like she was planting a flag. Inside the garage, the treadmill whirred to life. But this time, I had modified it. Instead of simply spinning, it now triggered a hidden sensor rigged to a small speaker system, one that blasted a pre-recorded message through my driveway. Unauthorized use of private utilities detected. Activity logged and reported. Smile for the cameras. The startled group jumped back as if they'd been tossed. Doug nearly tripped over his own feet. Karen, red-faced and sputtering, shouted something I couldn't hear. I pushed open the front door and stepped outside, waving cheerfully. "Everything all right out here?" Karen stormed up to me, jabbing a finger into the air. "You're creating a public nuisance." I raised an eyebrow. "On my private property? Interesting." Before she could spit another accusation, I pulled out the city permit and held it up like a holy relic. "This outlet," I said clearly, "is fully permitted, inspected, and protected under city code. Any unauthorized use is considered theft of services." I let that sink in. Doug swallowed visibly. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen tried to rally. "The HOA has authority here. Funny you should mention that." I flipped to the second document, copies of the Willow Creek HOA charter I had dug up during my research. Section 4, subsection D. The HOA has no jurisdiction over privately installed, city-permitted utilities. Members are responsible for their own services unless expressly volunteered in writing. I smiled coldly. "Would you like to see the volunteer forms?" "Oh wait, you don't have any." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. "Effective immediately," I said, stepping forward, voice low and firm. "If you or anyone under your direction attempts to access my property or utilities without consent, I will pursue criminal charges. Theft, trespassing, harassment." Doug took a step back. The board members muttered excuses and scurried away. But Karen stayed, fists clenched at her sides, trembling with impotent rage. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I shrugged. "I think I've started." And with that, I turned and walked back inside, leaving her standing in the dying light, humiliated. Behind me, Emma cheered softly. But we both knew Karen wouldn't slink away quietly. Not her. No, she'd come back. She'd plot, scheme, claw for any scrap of control she could salvage. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because this time, I wasn't just defending a power outlet. I was defending the principle she could never understand. You can't steal what you don't own. And tomorrow, during her precious community event, she was going to learn that lesson the hard way. Saturday dawned bright and hot, the kind of oppressive southern heat that cooked everything from the inside out. By noon, Willow Creek Estates was buzzing. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks. Tents sprang up like mushrooms overnight. Children darted between food trucks parked on the cul-de-sac. And smack in the center of it all was Karen, queen of the festivities, holding court beneath a massive banner. Willow Creek Community Celebration, powered by our neighborhood spirit. The audacity almost made me laugh. Emma and I set up lawn chairs just inside our driveway, sipping iced tea like casual spectators. I had no intention of interfering. I didn't have to, because Karen had already built her downfall. The extension cord snaked across the street once again, plugged boldly into my outlet, right into the treadmill trap. Only this time, I had added a small but critical upgrade, a surge protection cutoff switch tied to a power monitor. The moment energy demand exceeded a certain threshold, the system would trip. No shouting. No confrontation. Just cold, clinical consequences. At 2 p.m. sharp, a DJ hired by Karen cranked up the music. Bass thumped so hard it rattled windows. Bounce houses inflated. Cotton candy machines whirred to life. All of it, hundreds of amps of unapproved, unpaid-for power, sucked straight from my outlet. At first, everything seemed fine. Then the treadmill began to spin wildly. 30 seconds later, the surge monitor flashed red. And with a loud click, the entire setup lost power. Music cut mid-beat. Bounce houses sagged pathetically. Cotton candy machines wound down into mournful silence. The ice cream truck driver shouted in confusion. The whole street stood blinking in stunned, sun-baked confusion. Karen scrambled to the center of the street, barking orders, waving her arms. She kicked at cords, yanked plugs, cursed at the bewildered DJ. But no amount of stomping could bring the event back to life. Parents looked around nervously. Kids whined. Vendors packed up hastily, some demanding payment before leaving. A murmur started to rise through the crowd. First confusion, then irritation. That's when I calmly stood, stepped onto the sidewalk, and raised my voice just enough to be heard. Hey, everyone. If you're wondering why the power's out, Karen's event was illegally pulling electricity from my private outlet. I cut the supply to avoid a fire hazard. I held up the city permit for emphasis. Fully documented. Fully within my rights. Dead silence followed. Karen's face twisted in horror. Lies, she shrieked. He sabotaged us. But nobody rushed to her defense. Instead, angry voices turned toward her. You didn't get permission? You said the HOA approved this. My food's ruined. My kid's still stuck in the bounce house. The atmosphere curdled into outright hostility. Karen tried to shout over them, tried to wave her clipboard of imaginary authority, but it was no use. The illusion was shattered. Her power, built on assumption and intimidation, melted under the harsh glare of exposed truth. In the middle of it all, a police cruiser rolled up. Apparently, one of the vendors had already called about theft of services. The officer stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses, taking in the sagging tents and furious crowd. Someone want to explain what's going on? He asked coolly. Karen rushed forward, her voice high and desperate. But the officer cut her off, directing his questions at me after a quick scan of the situation. I explained calmly. Showed my permit. Showed the documents. Explained the unauthorized power draw. Karen tried to interrupt, but the officer raised a hand. Ma'am, I'm speaking with him. A few tense minutes later, the officer made his decision. Karen was issued a citation for theft of services and unlawful event setup without city permits. A second citation for endangering public safety through unauthorized power draws. Doug hung his head. Board members slinked away, pretending not to know her. Emma squeezed my hand as Karen's shrieks faded into the thick, humid air. The crowd dispersed rapidly, people packing up chairs, muttering under their breath. Vendors tore down what was left of their booths. In less than an hour, the community celebration dissolved into nothing more than discarded napkins and bitter memories. As Karen sat on the curb, red-eyed and furious, I took one last look around. This wasn't just about an outlet. It never had been. It was about boundaries, respect, community built on consent, not conquest. And sometimes, The only way to defend your home is to wire it to a treadmill and let the bullies exhaust themselves. Emma laughed as we packed up our chairs. Think she'll try again? I smiled as we walked inside. Let her. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way.